We often mistake wealth for security. We convince ourselves that if our bank accounts are full, our lives are safe from the storms of the world. For 30 years, James had lived inside that illusion. But sometimes reality doesn't knock politely at the door. It kicks it down. For James, the illusion shattered on a Tuesday afternoon, under the dusty roof of a rural workshop, with a sound smaller than a whisper, but louder than a scream. Beep! The red light on the credit card terminal flashed once, sharp and unforgiving. Declined. James stared at the machine. The workshop around him was buzzing with the noise of saws and hammers, the sound of Diep's dream coming alive. But in his ears there was only silence. He frowned, tapping the sleek black card on the counter. "Try it again," he told the supplier, a man whose patience was wearing thin. "It's a platinum card. It doesn't get declined." The supplier sighed and jammed the card back into the slot, pressing the buttons with aggressive force. Beep, declined. "It says contact issuer, Mr. James," the supplier said flatly. "Do you have cash, or are we wasting time here?" James felt the blood drain from his face. He reached for the card, and for the first time in his life, his hand trembled. Just a fraction, but it was there, the physical manifestation of his foundation crumbling. "Is everything all right?" The voice came from his side, soft and laced with concern. "Diep." She was wiping sawdust from her forehead, her eyes wide and trusting. She didn't see the flashing red light. She only saw him. She saw the man who had promised her that everything would be okay. It's fine," James lied. The word tasted like ash on his tongue. He forced a smile. "Just a security lock. The bank probably thinks I'm still in the city. I need to step out and call them." "Oh," Diep exhaled, relieved. She reached out and squeezed his arm. "Don't worry, James. Go call them. We can wait." Her trust was a knife in his gut. She didn't know that the security lock was actually a guillotine falling on his neck. James walked away, his legs feeling like lead. He found a secluded spot behind a stack of drying timber. He pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the contact labeled Mother. He knew with a sinking dread exactly what had happened. He dialed. The line clicked open instantly. "I wondered how long it would take," his mother's voice came through. It was elegant, composed, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You cut me off," James whispered, hunched over. "I'm standing in front of a supplier, Mom. My card was declined. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" "Humiliation is a necessary lesson, James," she replied smoothly. "But do not blame me. This was your father's directive." James closed his eyes. "He knows. He knows everything," she said. "The village, the workshop, the woman with the child. He had you investigated weeks ago. He knows you were playing house in the mountains while your responsibilities at the company gathered dust." The revelation hit James with the force of a physical blow. He felt violated. His sanctuary had been tainted by the cold, prying eyes of private investigators. "He gave me a message to pass to you," his mother continued. "You have until sunset. Come home, apologize, and leave that woman behind. If you do, the account's open, your trust fund is restored, and this little mistake is forgotten." "And if I don't?" James asked, his voice shaking. "Then you are on your own, truly on your own. No money, no influence. You want to live a simple life? Then you can learn to starve like a simple man." James looked back toward the workshop. Through the dusty window, he could see Diep laughing at something a worker said. She looked so light, so unburdened. She thought their future was secure because he was there to protect it. "Mom, please," James begged, desperate. "She needs this money for the deposit. Just unlock it for an hour. I'll pay you back double. Don't let her lose her dream." "It's not about the money, James. It's about the choice. Her or us." "That's not a choice. That's cruelty." "Goodbye, James." The line went dead. James stared at the black screen, a scream building in his chest that he couldn't release. He was a man who had commanded boardrooms, who had moved millions with a signature. Now, stripped of his father's money, he was nobody. He was less than nobody. He was a liar holding up a line. He checked his watch. The supplier was pacing now. James had maybe 90 minutes before the deal fell through. 90 minutes to find 200 million dong, or Diep loses everything. He composed himself, smoothing the lapels of his Italian suit, and walked back to Diep. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. "I have to drive to the town branch," he told her, the lie flowing smoother this time. "Withdraw cash manually. Signal issues with the bank." "Okay, hurry back," she chirped, waving happily. "Drive safely." Her wave broke his heart. He walked to his car, the black luxury sedan parked under the banyan tree. It was a beast of a machine, a symbol of power and prestige. It was the last thing he owned. As he started the engine, he didn't drive to the bank. He drove past it. He drove toward the edge of the district where desperate men went to do desperate things. He pulled up to Tuan's Pawn and Auto Trading. The lot was a graveyard of broken dreams, rusted trucks, and shady deals. When James stepped out of his gleaming car, a man walked out of the shack. Tuan. He wore a dirty tank top and looked at James like a wolf looks at a lost lamb. "You lost, rich boy?" Tuan sneered. "I'm selling," James said, his voice flat. "Cash. Now." Tuan laughed, a harsh sound. He circled the car, kicking the tires. "No papers? Selling in a rush? I smell trouble, and trouble lowers the price." "It's worth 2 billion, James said, trying to stand tall. 300 million, Tuan spat. "Take it or walk." 300 million. It was theft. It was an insult to his dignity. But James looked at his watch. He thought of Diep's face when the supplier would tell her the deal was off. He thought of her tears. "Her or us," his mother had said. James looked at Tuan. He looked at the car. And in that dusty lot, James realized something profound. Dignity isn't about what you own. It's about what you are willing to sacrifice. "Done," James whispered. He handed over the keys. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what he was doing. He was severing the last tie to his old life. He took the black plastic bag full of dirty bills. James didn't look back at the car. He couldn't. He walked out of the lot, dust coating his expensive shoes. He was stranded. He was broke. But as he clutched that plastic bag to his chest, he felt a strange, terrifying sense of purpose. He was walking into a storm, yes, but he was walking into it for her. 10 kilometers. In a luxury car with air conditioning, that distance is nothing. A few songs on the radio, a fleeting thought. But on foot, under the relentless afternoon sun, in Italian leather shoes designed for boardrooms, 10 kilometers is an eternity. James ran. He didn't run like an athlete. He ran like a man escaping a fire. The plastic bag full of cash was clutched tight against his chest, thumping against his ribs with every stride. It was a rhythmic reminder of his new reality. He had sold his identity for a bag of dirty money to save a woman who didn't even know he was in danger. By the 5th kilometer, his expensive shoes were ruining his feet. He felt blisters form and burst, raw skin rubbing against fine leather. Sweat soaked his white shirt, turning it translucent. Dust coated his face, settling into the lines of worry around his eyes. Cars passed him, kicking up clouds of dirt. People stared at the man in the ruined suit, running like a madman. James didn't care. He checked his watch. 30 minutes left. His lungs burned. A voice in his head, his mother's voice, whispered, "Look at you. Pathetic. A peasant." But then another voice answered, Diep's voice. "I feel like I can do anything because you're behind me." James gritted his teeth and forced his legs to move. For 30 years, money had been magic to him, invisible and endless. He had never sweated for it. He had never bled for it. But this money, This 300 million in the bag. He had traded his pride for it. And for the first time, James felt the true weight of value. The workshop appeared on the horizon just as the sun began to dip. James stumbled through the gate, gasping for air. The scene was tense. The supplier was standing up, his ledger closed. Diep stood near him, looking small and terrified. "Time's up," the supplier said. "I'm leaving." "Wait!" The scream tore from James's throat. He stumbled forward, legs nearly giving out. Every head in the workshop turned. They saw a man who looked like he had been through a war, hair wild, face muddy, suit ruined. James slammed the black plastic bag onto the wooden table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Count it," James wheezed, leaning on his knees. "It's all there." The supplier opened the bag, revealing the stacks of crumpled bills. His expression shifted from annoyance to respect. Money always commands respect. "All right," he grunted. "We have a deal." As the truck drove away, Diep stood frozen, staring at James. Then she ran to him, throwing her arms around his muddy frame, burying her face in his chest. "You did it," she sobbed. "James, you saved us." James closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of sawdust and cheap shampoo in her hair. He felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost knocked him over. But then Diep pulled back. She looked him up and down, her eyes wide with confusion. "James," she asked, her voice trembling, "where's the car? Why do you look like this?" This was the precipice. One truth could end everything. One lie could save it. James forced a brittle laugh. He wiped the dirt from his face. "The car?" The air conditioning compressor exploded halfway back. Smoke everywhere. I had to leave it at a garage. They said parts from Germany might take weeks. "So you ran back?" Diep asked, looking at his ruined shoes. "I jogged," James smiled through the pain. "Didn't want the supplier to leave. Good exercise." Diep's eyes shone with tears. She didn't see a liar. She saw a knight who had run 10 kilometers to keep a promise. She kissed his dirty knuckles. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would do without you." "You'll never have to find out," James promised. That evening, the small house was quiet. Outside, a storm was brewing. Inside, the light of a single bulb cast warm shadows over a simple meal: boiled vegetables, fish sauce, and river snails. James ate hungrily. He had dined in Michelin-star restaurants, but nothing had ever tasted as good as this bowl of rice. He was exhausted, but his spirit felt light. They were safe. Diep pushed the best snails into his bowl. "Eat more," she said softly. "You worked hard." James smiled. "It's delicious." Ding. A text message notification from Diep's phone lying on the table. Diep picked it up casually. Who is texting at this hour? James focused on his food, feeling safe. The crisis was over. "It's from Lan," Diep said, sounding confused. "She says she was at the district town today." James froze. The snail shells slipped from his fingers. Lan, the village gossip. "She sent a picture," Diep continued. Her voice went flat, hollow. James slowly lifted his head. Diep's face had gone pale. Her hand trembled. "Diep?" James whispered. She didn't answer. She just stared at the screen, then slowly turned it toward him. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. James standing in the dusty lot of Tuan's pawn shop, bowing his head, handing keys to the sleazy owner. The black luxury car, supposedly in a garage, was clearly visible. The text read, "Sister Diep, isn't this Mr. James? I saw him selling his Mercedes to Tuan the Shark for cheap cash. Is he in trouble?" The silence in the room was heavier than the storm outside. The lies shattered. James looked at the photo, then at Diep. He saw heartbreak in her eyes. She wasn't looking at a hero anymore. She was looking at a man who had sold his pride and lied to her face about it. "James," she whispered, a tear escaping. "What did you do?" Outside, thunder cracked, but James only heard the sound of his world falling apart.
Diep tin rằng tiền bạc là tấm khiên bảo vệ cuộc sống, cho đến ngày thẻ tín dụng của anh bị từ chối ngay giữa xưởng gỗ, nơi giấc mơ của Diep đang hình thành. Anh bàng hoàng nhận ra cha mình đã cắt toàn bộ tài chính, buộc anh phải lựa chọn, rời bỏ Diep để quay về hoặc tự sinh tồn không một đồng hỗ trợ. Để cứu khoản đặt cọc cho xưởng, Diep bán chiếc xe sang, biểu tượng cuối cùng của địa vị, với giá rẻ mạt, rồi chạy bộ 10 cây số dưới nắng gắt để kịp giao tiền. Diệp chỉ thấy anh dường như là người giữ lời hứa, không biết sự thật phía sau. Nhưng buổi tối yên bình nhanh chóng tan vỡ khi một bức ảnh phơi bày việc Diep bán xe, lời nói dối sụp đổ và mối quan hệ đứng trước cơn bão lớn hơn bao giờ hết.